Welcome back to the Joseph Graham Show. Today I'm with Lisa Boone. Now, I met you through my friend Amanda Johnson probably almost a year and a half ago. We've been kind of playing the back and forth game about like scheduling and, life happens and all the crazy fun stuff with that. But I always like to start these podcasts out like this, Lisa. Tell people who you are, who you help, and what you do.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for your time and in this beautiful invitation to just come and have a conversation. I am Lisa Boone. I am a mom of a beautiful daughter who had a massive brain injury when she was 15, and that was quite an ordeal to go through. I'm also a wife of a beautiful man, and I have two other children besides my daughter. I'm a mom of two big white Labrador retrievers named Ebby and Barney, and they are the highlights of our life. They keep us very busy. I'm also a hospice certified palliative nurse for about 25 years and have worked with the Integris healthcare system for that long. Interesting fact, I work nights. I'm
Mm.
like over 60 and I work nights on call, which means there's a circumference of Oklahoma City of about 70 miles that I travel all through the night in all kinds of parts of the city with all the different kinds of people who are in crisis at the end of life, whether they are dying or whether they're in pain crisis or whatever situation it is. I go out in the middle of the night and am blessed to be able to be present to those families to try to help them through a really awful time in their lives.
Wow. So there was like a bunch of nuggets there, but let's start here because I used to work third shift when I was younger. What
Okay.
people don't realize is, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
overnight, that is not easy. That
No,
is
sir.
very. How do you manage your day even? Because my wife used to joke that I'm a new husband once I got off third because I was a zombie.
It's been an interesting way of life. I've been doing it for a long time because when my daughter had that massive brain injury 17 years ago, the gift of being able to work nights, and God actually placed me in that night shift after being a nurse manager in a busy orthopedic unit for 20 years. He put me into this other position, which I had no idea. He was preparing me for what was fixing to happen in my life. So it's really been a blessing to work nights on call so I can be home with her during the day. So, point to your question, right? I'm like out all night long when everybody's sleeping, and then
Yep.
I come in, and people think I should just be like them during the day, and they missed my entire emotional, hard, traumatic night with these people who were suffering.
Hmm.
I think one of the biggest things I do is try not to work shifts all in a row.
Hmm.
I'll do one or two 12-hour shifts and then I'll be off for 2 or 3 nights.
Hmm.
I usually stay up during the day, take a nap in the afternoon,
Yep.
but it's a way of life that God has blessed me with in order to be present to my daughter during the day and work at night. So
Hmm.
it's been interesting. My last shift, I went to the worst part of town in Oklahoma City to a death. And there were bars on the window, there were bars on the door. And the caregiver, as I'm leaving, she goes, "Now I have a 38 in my pocket, so I'm going to walk you to your car and make sure you get in that car safe." And I was like, "Okay, thank you so much." That's an example of that late night um, emotional awareness and stress of things lurk in the night that you really don't want to encounter.
Hmm.
That's true fact.
Well, it's interesting to me because I'm just thinking about different things. One, from your whole story, I'm just hearing like the word healer in my head. Like you just have the, I don't know if it's the calling, whatever term you want to use with it, but that aspect of life. How do you deal with that much pain and death though? Like it has to be a gift because I'll be honest with you, my mom passed last November. I was there with my dad all the way through till like 3 a.m. when she passed. It was probably one, and again, it was my mom. It's more emotional, but it's probably one of the hardest, most emotional thing. And you're going into different environments. You're getting people's emotions, their regrets, their happiness. Like, how do you even deal with that? That's wild.
That's such a good question. You know, my dad died of cancer not too long ago, and being a hospice nurse, I knew everything that was happening, but being a daughter was completely different than being a nurse and being a stranger. One of the things that is really powerful for me, and it's something I talk about when I go speak to nursing students or I go speak to the medical profession, the power of presence
Mhm.
and how important it is for us to make these connections in that moment. And so before I cross the threshold of a death or a pain crisis or whatever is happening beyond that threshold of that door, I pause for a moment and I just ask God to give me the presence and the awareness to listen and to hear from the family what it is they need. I can never go in and assume. And part of that comes from my years of spiritual direction training, being trained by sisters of the monastery on how to do deep, holy listening in a spiritual direction kind of companion way. And so my spiritual formation and my faith has enabled me to enter into these moments not thinking about me,
Mhm.
although I'm involved in that because I have these feelings inside, but recognizing those feelings, but yet still being present and making some kind of connection. And Joe, I remember, I mean, the connections come in the weirdest ways. Like I can remember in this one house that was like a hoarder, it was filthy, dirty, last place in the world I wanted to be. There were fleas, roaches, all the stuff. But up on the top of the refrigerator, I saw a box of Lucky Charms. And I just paused. And I have a box of Lucky Charms in
Mhm.
my cabinet for my daughter. And that was my human connection with that family.
Mhm.
They are human, just like me. We're all the same. We live in different ways. But it was just that simple connection that grounded me into being able to be present with those families. Now, post my shift, when I've had so much grief that has coated my spirit and onto me, and I'm so sad, and sometimes I'll have two or three deaths at a night, and sometimes it's a child,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
sometimes it's a 90-year-old person, and sometimes it's a 50-year-old wife and a mama. It's all different. But like when they leave the home for the last time on the gurney with the funeral home, and I'm standing at the front door, and I know what that feels like because I watched my dad leave his home. It's like, oh my gosh, this pain is real. But to be able to stand in that pain with those people and feel it and not being able to fix it, but to trust that I'm just sharing that moment and giving them love and strength. But then when I get home, one of my most favorite things to do is to walk.
Mhm.
I get outside and I walk a minimum of 2 or 3 miles a day,
Mhm.
and I go into God's nature and I begin to shed off everything that clung to me that night. And God is so gracious to remove all of that heaviness and all of that sadness to start all over again.
Mhm.
And I think one of the biggest things I learned when Jess had her skiing accident and she was so tragically injured and was a mute spastic quadriplegic for a long time, had both sides of her skull removed. She, it was just terrible. They had part of her right frontal lobe removed because she crashed into a tree and her
Mm.
goggles went into her brain. Being the one on the other side of the bed, you know, God always has given me this sense of compassion and empathy with the patient. But to be on the other side of the bed and receive the health care for 10, 15 years, all of a sudden, my ability of compassion and empathy and focus and presence to the family changed
Mhm.
forever because I walked in those shoes in such a way that it enabled me to be this better caregiver, but also enables me to release the things that aren't mine to hold forever, but just for a moment in time.
Mhm. No, I love that because you're talking about holding space for people. And their most weakest moments. A death of anyone normally is one of the hardest things someone has to go through. And you've also had this thread, like in almost every statement, and it's genuine, which I love, is your relationship with God. Where did that develop? Because I think we are the sum of our beliefs, we're the sum of our experiences, and we're the sum of what we allow in and out of our lives. So, have you always had a close relationship with God, or is that something that you had later on, or how did you even get that connection?
You know, mom and dad took us to church, got baptized when I was like 12. I had a lot of great spiritual mentors, learned to play the guitar, learned to praise and worship, got married. I was in the church. Then I got divorced and got away from the church and was away from the church for several years. Then got remarried, got back into the church. But it's when I went to a spiritual community called Walk to Emmaus, which it's like a 72-hour walk with an intentionality of learning who Jesus was walking on the earth. And I met Jesus face to face in one of those moments in time where I truly began to develop a relationship with him.
Hmm.
And then I got into these spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, which was this formation of prayer and discipline of being present to people and being present to God. And then I went into spiritual direction training, where I really began to ground in to who I was and who God was to me, and to begin to develop my true spiritual being in relation to the world, in relation to people, into relation to creation. And then I got into this other beautiful group called the Yellow Butterfly Foundation, and then I got into this another group, Amanda's community, the
Hmm.
butterfly chrysalis community. And so just all these human experiences with all of these different people who embrace spirituality and God in different ways really opened me up to this expansiveness of being able to hold whatever, being so grounded in who I was to in God and with God, and then also the personal experience of God in the midst of this profound trauma and pain and grief and suffering that I went through so long with my daughter,
Hmm.
and learning at such a brutal depth of darkness how faithful he is.
Hmm.
And it really had nothing to do with how I acted or what I was bringing to the table. It had everything to do with how much he loves his children and how he redeems and recreates. And he knows these tragedies and these hard things are going to happen, but he's faithful to be with us. And all he asks us to do is just take another step, keep moving forward, and to trust that he's going to bring help. He's going to bring a rescue mission. And then the beautiful thing is, at the end of all of that, I discovered that God has this incredible way of breathing in my suffering and my grief and my loss, holding it in that expansive love, and then breathing out this spirit inside of me of compassion and empathy that enables me to help others in their profound grief and tragedy, which you would maybe refer to as a wounded healer. And how
Hmm.
many wounded healers do you know, Joe, who
A
have
lot.
been wounded
Yep.
themselves? And God says now, and it's almost like Christ, the wounded Christ, and now he's here, the healer, the redeemer, the recreator. And it's almost like we have to be wounded to have the wounds, the openings in our flesh to receive other people's pain and to
Hmm.
hold it in that love, and then to breathe out healing and relief and redemption and recreation. Such a beautiful way to live.
Hmm.
But it requires intentionality, daily surrender, daily seeking of his word and worship and creation and all the ways of life that bring all of that back into focus. Like today, I had to go get a screw taken out of my tire. I'm a person that when I buy a car, I buy a 4-year tire warranty. Have you ever done that before?
Hmm.
I do that because I always get screws, I always get flats because of all the places I drive
Right,
in the
right.
middle of the
Makes
night.
sense. Yep.
So over the last 4 months, I've had my tire fixed 3 times. I've had 2 new tires put on my car, but it's a true thing with a hospice nurse or any nurse or anybody driving all over Oklahoma City at night. And so that's one of my greatest pet peeves is I have to take my car into the dealership and I have to spend 3 hours in line waiting,
Mm-hmm.
so I usually just go, and I put it off to the last moment. But when you're in a different way of life, I'm like, okay, what can I do in that 2 hours? And there's a cemetery that I had never seen before across the street from the service department. So I go and I walk 3 miles in the cemetery this morning. And it was the most peaceful, sacred, holy ground, beautiful place to walk and begin to think about all of those saints that had gone before us, laying in rest in that ground, and begin to wonder how all those families are moving on without their physical well-being of their loved one. I saw loved ones laying flowers down. I
Mm-hmm.
saw a service. I saw beautiful flowers. I saw graves that were not cared for. I mean, it was just, and all these different names. And death is such a miracle. It's breathtaking. And I know that may sound morbid to some people. My husband and I have these conversations a lot. But when you are in death every day, you begin to look at death as a miracle, just like a baby's birth.
Mm-hmm.
Because what if there was no way to escape the suffering of cancer or the suffering of some kind of terminally ill or the suffering of old age and dementia? What would it be like if we had to live till we were 500 years old with this flesh and all of the things that happen to us? That there is this God who says, okay, enough. I'm going to give you a new body and I'm going to give you a perfect place to live with perfect love and light. I'm going to rescue you from what you're having to endure. Now, of course, there's those tragedies that happen that we don't have any idea
Yeah.
why. When I was walking in this cemetery today, I had been following this young man named Mighty Miller, and he had to have lung transplants, and he was like 15 years old, and it, he ended up not surviving. And I watched his journey, and his family just were these heroes, and these healthcare givers were these heroes, and everybody, especially Mighty Miller, was a hero in fighting this battle. But I didn't go to his service because I didn't really know the family.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm walking in this cemetery and I passed by his grave. And it was such a moment of deep gratitude that I've loved this child, watched this child, given money to this child's cause. And and it wasn't like he had a big headstone. It was just this little bitty placard because it hasn't been that long since he's died. And there
Mm-hmm.
his sweet face is, and there is fresh grass. And I just pause and think about his mama
Mm-hmm.
and how she's moving on in great grief, but she is a
Yeah.
hero. She's strong and she misses him every day, but she knows she's got to take that next right step and move forward because her work here on earth isn't done and Miller's is. It's just all so profoundly brutal. Amanda has a word called brutal. It's brutal and it's beautiful at the
Yes.
same time.
Yes. But I think we get so caught up in the what we think's important for the day or the week instead of the impact life has. Like you mentioned with I don't remember, I'm not gonna say his name
Mighty
wrong.
Miller.
Thank you, Mighty Miller. He impacted a lot more people than say Joe the plumber. I'm making up Joe the plumber, so if you think it's you, it's not you. Who just did their life and did their thing, which is not a bad thing. Don't hear what I'm not saying, but I think going back to your original point, The people like us that go through great traumas, issues, stuff, have a capacity to help hold space, be with, be empowered by God, however you want to put it, people that need us at that moment. And if you know where you're going when you pass, death is not as scary as if you have no clue because you have no hope. So I think what I keep hearing through the thread, and we're definitely going to get to your daughter because I know that was a major thing, but I know I'm doing it in reverse compared to most podcasts because I just do it differently. But I'm just thinking about the fact that when you are going through certain things, things happen to you for a reason. It doesn't always mean that you like them, but they happen for you. Like your capacity to be able to stand in the gap for people is based off your life experiences. Now, it does not mean your life experiences are the best, the greatest. Some people I know have gone through horrendous things would never wish on people. But now they have the ability to pull people out of the dark that they would never been able to connect with them if not. Which goes to this weird question. I'm going to ask it because it's just in my head. Why do you think God allows bad things like this to happen? You're a spiritual lady, you know God, and I want your take on this. And this is not me saying God is bad or good or what, like, I just want to know your thoughts.
Ask that one more time, slow.
Why does God allow bad things to happen in general? Yes, I do understand the Christian concept of sin, but a lot of people would just say, well, that's just a platitude that someone made up to make people feel better. What are your thoughts? Why does God allow certain things to happen?
You know, God is a mystery, and we will never know all of the different dimensions of God. And to even pretend to think that we have a handle on what God is thinking or doing, his ways and thoughts are higher than the heavens are to the earth, is, and even in scripture, it talks about there are some things that we will never understand or know because we wouldn't be able to handle them all.
Mhm.
So yesterday I was in one of my groups that I meet weekly with, a prayer accountability type of group, and the question was about someone was talking about guardian angels and how their friend has guardian angels and how they just think it's wonderful that this person is protected by all these this guardian angel. And then the other person said, yeah, but what about the 7-year-old that was kidnapped and killed in the van by the UPS driver? And
Mhm.
where was her guardian angel? We can't
Yeah.
ever put one concept in a box. Why does God allow bad things to happen? There was a book written why do bad things happen to good people?
Mhm.
We don't know. But what we do know, and that's really to me, Joe, the wrong question.
Mhm.
I do believe we can ask questions, but I think uh, one of the comments that was made in that meeting yesterday was about the book Shack. Have you ever read The
Yep.
Shack?
Yep. I've read it.
I mean, what a beautiful way to see God being with that little girl and protecting her from that trauma and her not really experiencing that trauma the way we experience the trauma, the protection and the presence of God. And I can relate to that because when Jess was so tragically injured, I can remember the pain being so horrific that I could not even lift my head up off my chest. It was like somebody had taken cement blocks and just put them on me because there was, as far as the human eyes, there was no hope she was going to survive this. And so now the question was, how do I survive this? And it was through God being with me,
Mhm.
breathing life in each moment. It's when I found that I just stayed in that moment, not looking back at all that I lost and not looking forward to all the things that could happen. I can do this moment right now.
Mhm.
And I found myself breathing and being upright each moment. I could do that moment. So yesterday I was listening to this scripture lesson about Job, and here's God, and he's like, "Hey Satan, what are you doing today?" And Satan goes, "Hey, I'm just roaming around the world and looking for something to do." And God says, "Well, what about my servant Job? Have you seen him?" I'm like, "Hey God, what are you doing?" This is the first time I reacted that way. Why
Yeah.
are you pointing out Job? What's happening
Yeah.
here? Leave Job alone. He's over here being obedient,
Hmm.
making sacrifices for his kids, living the way that you called him to live, and you're calling Satan to his attention to come play with him, and he's like, "See how good Job is? He's a faithful servant." And Satan goes, "Yeah, as long as you give him what he wants." You start taking stuff away from him and let's see how obedient and faithful he is. And God goes, "Okay, go ahead. Do anything you want to do to Job, except you can't kill him." And Satan goes, "Okay."
Hmm.
And he goes to town. And I'm like, "God, what game are you playing with your human species that you are telling him to go?" And I had to really sit with that for a while, and we talked about that yesterday. And Job loses everything except his life. And yet, even though you take everything away from me, God, I will still praise you because you created me, and the Lord gives and the Lord takes away.
Hmm.
So, what is our relationship based on with God? Is it based on what God gives us, that He's a good God? Or is it based on who God is
Hmm.
and His creation? And regardless of our way of life or how this earth impacts us, do we continually look to Him for help and gratitude for all that He has given us? And even when He takes it away, recognizing that we don't belong to this world and we are journeying through this world, getting to have a human experience. We are
Hmm.
spiritual beings having a human experience, not human beings having a spiritual experience. So when you begin to shift your perspective of what's happening, and then I went on this really interesting, in-depth retreat in Sedona, Arizona.
Hmm.
And it was about my daughter and this tragedy I went through and the brutality of all of it. And this lady who was in a different spiritual belief system than me said,
Hmm.
"Well, Lisa, what if before Jessie came to earth as a human and she was in heaven with God, God had all of his creation around him and he said, 'I need somebody to go to the earth and I need somebody to walk this journey.' And it's going to be this journey where you're going to have a great life and then you're going to have this horrific accident and you're going to go through unimaginable physical problems and issues. But I'm going to be with you the whole time. I'm going to help and provide all the resources and then you'll come back to me. But I will never leave you nor forsake you." And what if Jessie raised her hand and said, "God, I'll do that for you. That's how much I love you." And I just went, whoa.
Hmm.
I've never been so expansive in my thinking that there would be a possibility that Jessie could even, maybe she chose that journey for
Hmm.
herself. And then she goes, "And Lisa, what if you, as a little bitty spirit, was in the room when God said, 'And I need a mom that's
Hmm.
going to go on this earth and her life's just going to go normal. Everything's going to be good. You're going to have some routine hard ways, but then you're going to have a child who's going to go through hell. I'm going to be with you and I'm going to send you help and I'll never leave you, but it's going to be one of the hardest things you've ever done.'" And what if you raised your hand and said, "I'll do that, God. I will I will sacrifice that for you. That's my cross I'm going to carry."
Hmm.
Almost like Jesus when God said, "I'm going to do that. I'm going to come to the earth and I'm going to come. I know where I've come from. I know where I'm going. And here's my journey. I have come to the earth to die, to
Hmm.
sacrifice and to die to save the world." Isn't that a cool thing to think about
Hmm.
when you start talking about bad things happening to good people?
Yeah. No, I love that. I think it's always a reframe. And I love that you have the ability to not be so, and I'm going to say it this way because it's just how my mind goes, rigid in my belief systems are this way, so I can't listen to anyone that might have a little bit of a different thought process. The other thing that was screaming in my head, and this is just my own thing that annoys me, is what about all these people that preach the pimp Jesus out gospel or the prosperity gospel? What, I'm sorry, some of the stuff I'm sitting here going to be like, every great man of faith died, or woman of faith died, had some hardship, had something that they had to go through. And we have these people saying, well, if you give me $10, God has to bless you. God doesn't have to do anything. So I love the analogy of that. I'm sorry, that part was just popping out, but I know people like that. And I actually kind of lean toward that aspect of God's all knowing. So, I mean, I know there's Arminianists and Calvinists. I've grown up in the church. I can do Bible stuff a lot. Um, but I really do think that we do come here for a purpose and a plan. And maybe we did raise our hands, not knowing that, I mean, knowing, but not knowing it once we came here because we had to go through the experience of life. And I think it comes down to how you look at it. At the end of the day, something can be good or bad depending on how you look at it. Look at the dude that wrote Man's Search for Meaning in the concentration camp. Viktor Frankl, I believe is his name. He went through some of the most hellacious hell and still cared about people. Then there's someone that stubbed their toe in band in the fifth grade, and the world's the worst thing ever, and they hate everyone because they stubbed their toe. Like it's all perspective. So I do want to get into, because as a mother, I can't imagine having, because I have kids, right? My wife's bored the kids. They were inside of her, they came out of her. They're closer to her in a lot of ways than they are to me. I get that. It's a mom thing. I totally get that. How did you even deal with the, because like you said, you have that heavy pressure. Did you have people that helped you? Was it just the presence of God that helped you? How did it work when your daughter had that accident and they said there was no hope, but then she made it? And then the next step, and the next step, and the next step, and the next step. How did you go through that process? Because a lot of people would have folded.
And God knew that was going to happen. I believe that. When she hit that tree, she immediately vomited, went into posturing, and there was a nurse right there that saw her accident, opened her airway, cleaned the vomit out. Life flight was there. My brother Mark was on the same mountain skiing on the same day with Jess.
Mm,
Now, Jess was with our church group. My brother had been estranged from our family for over 2 or 3 years. So he had no idea that she was skiing on that mountain in Colorado,
mhm,
Glenwood Springs, and we had no idea he was skiing. He just happened to see someone carrying a skier down the slope to the waiting helicopter. He went down to see how that skier was doing when he heard her name. And
mhm,
he's like, Jessie Boone from Oklahoma? And they said, yes. He goes, my God, that's my niece. Now, he had not spoken to our family in years, and we had been praying to God for reconciliation. So here's how God used something he knew was going to happen. And so my brother's calling my mom, going, where's Bill and Lisa? Do you know what's happened to Jessie? So the fact that he was the first person on the scene, that got my attention. I
mhm.
was like, what's happening here, God? As opposed to it just playing out ordinary,
Yeah.
there was these extraordinary things that I recognized that went, okay, God's here.
Mhm,
Okay, God's here. Okay, God's here. And then he calls me and he goes, I went and looked at that tree that she hit. I was trying to figure out what happened. And do you know someone carved 3/16/09 on the tree with her name, Jessie B, and a cross? I said, no. And I knew it had to be her youth group.
mhm,
And he goes, you know what happened when I was looking at that 3/16/09? I said, what? He goes, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will never perish.
mhm,
I went, whoa, she's not going to perish
mhm,
because she
mm,
has eternal life. So that was like a stake or an anchor in my faith.
mhm,
And I was like, oh my gosh, God, what does this mean? If your son could be resurrected off to that tree after what happened to him, I believe that you can resurrect my daughter off of this tree after what happened to her. Now, not physically, but spiritually, either way. Of course, I wanted her physically with me, but I also asked God to take her home to Him if He would not restore her to some kind of quality of life. I wanted her to
mhm,
go to heaven. Being a nurse, I've cared for brain injured patients before, massive.
Yeah.
It's not pretty. It's awful.
Yeah.
And so it was little things like that. And then through all the spiritual formation beforehand, I began to see God in these tiny moments of where He was sending rescue missions, sending people, sending all these messages to me saying, I am here.
Hmm.
And that's all I needed to hear. I am here over and over and over again. I am here. And every moment I would just go, you are here. You are here. And that I began to start focusing on the good.
Hmm.
And when I could find the good in that horrible situation, I would go, there you are, God.
Hmm.
There you go. And that good might be she didn't need a blood transfusion that day, or that good might be uh, they didn't have to turn her ventilator settings up. It wasn't anything magical. It was just
Hmm.
anything that was good. I would go, there you are, God. And it was just this intentional way of finding God in every moment instead of focusing on the circumstances of the horrificness of a daughter with no skull, half of her frontal lobe taken off, in critical condition. I refused to look at that and I would just say, where are you, God?
Hmm.
And staying in the moment and doing the next right thing.
Hmm.
That is how I survived that horrible, and it just over and over and over and over again. And I find that that is now my way of life. I
Hmm.
just live in the moment. When something hard begins to start happening, I start looking for God. I'm like, okay, God, where are you in this? I know you're here. Show me. How do I help me? And all of a sudden, there's a cemetery across the road that I'd never seen before. He says, come walk with me.
Hmm.
You don't have to, and that was minor, just irritation of being in the waiting room and having to,
Yeah.
all the stuff that goes on with that. So finding God in the good,
Hmm.
regardless of how awful it is, because He's always there.
Yeah. No, I love that. And your daughter's from, I think from our talks has gotten better and better. Give people a little bit more of an update of where she's at now.
Yeah, she's 17 years out. We put both sides of her skull back on. And through brutal years, we rehabilitated her with the grace of God and a lot of people that helped us.
Hmm.
And she is walking and talking, and she lives with us. She has blindness in one eye, but she is beautiful. She's happy. She's joy filled. She has a part-time job that she's worked at for 7, 8 years as a, she goes in and does these computer spreadsheets for
Hmm.
a home health agency, Excel, where she goes in and finds all these denials in insurance claims and she creates all these spreadsheets. It's just amazing. And she gets up every morning, she dresses, showers, and takes care of herself for the most part. But she has a good brain injury, and so she will never live alone,
Right.
and that's okay.
Hmm.
But every morning she comes into the kitchen and she's like, "Mom," and she's memorized a Bible verse, and she talks to us about how deeply touched she is that Jesus speaks to her every morning, and she's like living with Jesus.
Hmm.
It's just pure love. It's beautiful.
Yeah. No, I love that. And it, not every story has a happy ending, but
No.
this here is a happy
Yes.
growth process in the store. So no, I love that. And here's the other thing, 'cause I don't even remember if I've mentioned this. You've wrote some books too, correct? Or you've wrote a
Yes.
book. Yes.
Yes.
Now, what's your book about your daughter? Here I am. You're an author, and we're, what are we, 35, 40 minutes in. I haven't even brought up that you write books. I'm doing
That's
really
right.
well today.
It's perfect.
tell,
This is
tell
exactly
us
what I like to talk about.
tell us a little bit about your book. And was that about your daughter, or is that about life, or what is your book about?
So, a week into her injury, the darkest night of my soul, I was looking in the middle of the night for a story like this that I could find that somebody actually could survive it. I was just looking for hope, and I couldn't find that story where someone was that brutally injured with their brain and survived. And so I promised God that night, I said, God, if you want to restore her, I'll write that story for the one person who's looking for hope in the middle of the night and can't find a story. I'll put Jessie's story in the world for it to be there forever.
Mm.
So fast forward, 15 years later, Jesse's doing well. And I'm like, okay, I need to write that story. And I had written 800 pages of care pages. That's kind of how I kept everybody abreast of her journey. It's kind of care pages isn't anymore, but there's other things
Hmm.
like that. And I couldn't write the story. I started over. I started over. I'm like, here I have all these pages, and I can't figure out how to put it all together.
Hmm.
And so I just looked at God and said, you know, I want to, you know, I've tried, I can't. He sends me Amanda Johnson,
Yep. Yep.
and she's a story coach. She is a
Hmm.
story oracle. She knows how to bring about stories that people have journeyed through and get them out into a book and organized in a beautiful way.
Hmm.
And so I started going on these intentional story retreats, healing retreats, because she said, you got great stories, but you got some healing to do, girl. And
Hmm.
so I had to do some deep inner searching. And finally, after the second 10-day intensive retreat of tears and pain, she goes, I think you're ready to write your first little story. She goes, she took me to the writing area and she said, I want you to write the hardest story you've ever written.
Hmm.
And I did. And I cried and sobbed and wailed like it happened the first day. And she was there with her hand on my shoulder saying right away. And what I realized was I had never grieved the loss of Jessie because I was so busy
Hmm.
fighting for her life and rehabilitating her. And so this book I wrote, Severed Sacredness, The Miraculous Journey of Jessie Boone, are all the stories that I had inside of me. And what I learned was once I wrote all these beautiful little stories of how God shows up in the hard, it emptied me and freed me and healed me to where now I have this joy that I didn't know that I had.
Hmm.
And God has allowed me now to be a speaker. I go and I speak to the medical staff about the power of seeing the patient and the family. I speak to the one who has no hope, and I give books to nursing students. I speak to the community to say, this is how you helped us, and how when community shows up. And so there's another book called Love Made Flesh, which shows all the examples of how the community showed up and carried us through this horrible time until we
Hmm.
could walk on our feet again. And so it's just been this incredible opportunity to share my story to different types of audiences. And my last audience, my favorite, was mothers who had lost their children to addiction and suicide. And I was like, God, how can I go share my story when my daughter didn't die? And
Hmm.
God, I spent some time discerning that. And He's like, you go show them how to find me in the darkness.
Yeah.
And so I was able to share all the stories of how I could find God in the darkest ways and how
Hmm.
God communicates to us through creation, through numbers, through people, through His Word, through song. And it was beautiful to see these women share how God spoke to them and continues to speak to them.
I love that. I love. Where can people find you at?
So I have a website called www.severedsacredness.com, and I write blogs, and so there's blogs of hope there. You can order my book on Amazon, Severed Sacredness. Love Made Flesh is also on Amazon. But if you ever wanted anybody to come and speak to your group, whether it be a church group, a medical group, a nurse group, a mom's group, whatever kind of group that needs hope or a word of how to find God in the darkest or how to celebrate God in the winds, I can speak to so many different people, but that's kind of one of my favorite things to do now is to just go share how God shows up and sends a rescue mission and how to spot that how to spot those that grace in the midst of all of the chaos in the world.
Mm, I love that. Before I let you go, we've talked about a lot of different things, but is there anything that you have on your heart you want to leave our listeners with?
To never, never, never give up. To always know that God is with you, Emmanuel. And all you have to do is say help, and God will show up through people. God will show up through creation. God will show up in however He communicates to you, which is as many people are as in this world as how God differently communicates. He has an intimate language with each one of us because he created each one of us to be who we are and to take care of our little corner of the world that he has placed us in. And so I guess my prayer is that no matter what anybody is going through, that you're never alone. Don't ever give up and start to look for the good. And that's where you'll find God working in your really hard circumstance. And
Mm,
He is the Redeemer, He's the Recreator, and He will bring help. Just like spring comes after the darkest, hardest winters, and just like rain comes after the drought, and just like morning comes after the darkest night, God is so faithful to speak through His creation to His children. So
mm.
that's probably what I would say.
I love that. Lisa, thank you for being on the show. And for all you listening, share this episode. There's plenty of people in the world that are going through things and they need hope. Share this hope with them. And until next time, be amazing. And thank you for listening.